The tragic radiological accident in Goiânia, Brazil, better known as the Cesium 137 incident, marks one of the darkest chapters in world history in terms of radioactive contamination. Much is said about Chernobyl and Fukushima, but what do you know about this unprecedented tragedy? Well, let me tell you now. It all began on September 13, 1987, in the heart of Goiânia, the capital of the Brazilian state of Goiás, when an abandoned radiotherapy device was discovered inside a defunct clinic. This event was classified as Level 5 on the International Nuclear Event Scale, which ranges from 0 to 7, with Level 5 representing accidents with widespread consequences. The drama started when scrap metal scavengers found the device, believing it to be recyclable metal. They dismantled the equipment and inadvertently spread the dangerous substance, creating a trail of contamination that affected hundreds of people. This disaster is considered the largest radioactive accident in Brazil and the largest in the world outside nuclear power plants, being one of the most significant incidents involving a radioactive source in human history. In this video, we will explore the events that led to this disaster, the human and institutional failures that allowed something so dangerous to go unnoticed, and the devastating consequences that followed. Stay with us as we uncover the details and stories of the victims of this tragic episode. Radioactive heart, the core of the disaster. The contamination in Goiânia originated from a capsule containing cesium chloride, a salt derived from the radioisotope Cesium-137, a highly radioactive chemical element. This capsule was part of a radiotherapy device and was housed inside a protective steel and lead box. The protective box had an iridium window, which allowed radiation to pass to the outside. Additionally, this box was inserted into a rotating container equipped with a collimator designed to direct and control the intensity of the radioactive beam. Although the serial number of the radioactive source is unknown, it is believed to have been manufactured around 1970 by the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in the United States. At the time of the accident, the radioactive material weighed approximately 93 grams and had a radioactive activity of 50.9 terabecquerels, TBq, equivalent to 1375 curies, Ci. To better understand the danger, terabecquerels, TBq, and curies, Ci, are units that measure radioactivity. 1 terabecquerel equals 1 trillion disintegrations per second, while 1 curie is approximately the activity of 1 gram of radium-226, corresponding to 37 billion disintegrations per second. These units help quantify the level of radiation emitted by a substance. The radiotherapy equipment in question was the Cesium F3000 model, developed in the 1950s by the Italian company Barazzetti and Camesera and marketed by Genere SpA. After the accident, the object containing the cesium capsule was collected by the Brazilian Army and is now on display as a trophy at the School of Specialized Instruction in Rio de Janeiro, in recognition of the efforts of those who participated in the decontamination of the affected area. Unleashing chaos, the origin of the Goiania radiological accident. The Goiania Institute of Radiotherapy was a private clinic located in downtown Goiânia. In 1971, a radiotherapy device began operating at the site, but in 1985, when the institute moved to a new location, the device was left behind in the old facilities, abandoned without proper precautions. Most of the clinic's buildings were demolished, but some rooms, including the one where the device was located, remained in ruins and accessible to anyone. This negligence by the owners and regulatory authorities would prove fatal shortly thereafter. A legal dispute further complicated the situation. The Goiania Institute of Radiotherapy was in litigation with the Society of São Vicente de Paula, the landowner, who had leased the space under the condition that the institute would provide free radiological exams for patients of the Santa Casa de Misericordia. Alleging that the institute was not fulfilling the agreement, the society filed an eviction lawsuit in 1984 and subsequently sold the land to the Institute of Social Security and Assistance of the state of Goiás, IPASGO. In 1986, the court declared IPASGO the new owner of the property. In 1987, the new owner began demolishing the building, but the demolition was interrupted by a court injunction that ordered the immediate halt of activities. The incompetence and neglect of the equipment left on site created a devastating and chaotic scenario ready to unleash an unprecedented tragedy. Dismantling the radiological equipment, releasing the invisible danger. In the state of abandonment in which the building was found, overgrown with weeds and without doors and windows, the equipment was discovered by two young men, Roberto dos Santos Alves and Wagner Mota Pereira. Believing they could extract some value from dismantling and separating the parts, they removed the device from the clinic on September 13, 1987. By the next day, they began to experience the first symptoms of radioactive contamination, believing the discomfort was due to something they had eaten. 5 days later, the piece was sold to a junkyard. It was at De Ver Ferreira's junkyard that the Cesium-137 capsule was opened to reclaim the lead. De Ver exposed 19.26 grams of Cesium-137 chloride, CSCl, a salt resembling table salt, NaCl, but glowing blue in the dark. Enchanted by the glow, De Ver showed the substance to his wife, Maria Gabriela, and distributed small amounts to family and friends. His brother, Ivo Ferreira, took some of the cesium to his daughter, Leda das Neves, who ended up touching the substance and ingesting particles along with a boiled egg prepared for dinner. Another brother of De Ver also had direct contact with the substance. Cesium chloride is hygroscopic, meaning it absorbs moisture from the air and easily adheres to clothes, skin and utensils, contaminating food and the body internally. Between September 19th and 26th, De Ver showed the capsule to various people who visited his junkyard. On October 23rd, Leda and Maria Gabriela died from the contamination. De Ver Ferreira underwent decontamination treatment at the Marcílio Dias Naval Hospital in Rio de Janeiro, but died 7 years later. The first signs of invisible hell. A few hours after exposure to the radioactive material, those affected began to develop alarming symptoms: intense nausea, debilitating dizziness, accompanied by severe vomiting and diarrhea. Desperate and unaware of the real cause of their suffering, the families of the contaminated initially sought help in drugstores, believing it to be food poisoning. Without improvement, some sought care at health centers and were quickly referred to hospitals. With each passing minute, the nightmare of radioactive contamination became more evident and terrifying. The tragic delay in detection, unpreparedness and negligence. Chaos was fully unleashed when healthcare professionals, completely unprepared to handle a case of radiological contamination, initially thought that the observed symptoms were due to an unknown contagious disease and treated the patients based solely on their symptoms. Maria Gabriela, suspecting that the magical blue glowing powder was responsible for her family's symptoms, decided to take action. Together with a junkyard employee, she took the cesium capsule to the health surveillance office. Surprisingly, the capsule remained abandoned on a chair for 2 days, without anyone realizing the imminent danger. This episode once again revealed the negligence and incompetence of the regulatory authorities, who failed to identify and respond quickly to such a severe radioactive threat. The combination of unpreparedness and institutional negligence further aggravated the situation, exposing a larger number of people to the devastating effects of radiation. During a consultation with doctors, Maria Gabriela mentioned that the vomiting and diarrhea started after her husband had dismantled that strange device. This crucial detail led physicist Walter Mendes Ferreira, who would later become a member of the National Nuclear Energy Commission, UNKINEN, to investigate further. Using two detectors at different times, Walter determined that the radiation levels were alarmingly high, revealing that it was a severe radiological accident. His quick action was vital in preventing an even greater tragedy. At a critical moment, a firefighter, unaware of the nature of the material, almost discarded the radioactive material into a flowing water source. Had this happened, Chernobyl and Fukushima might have seemed small in comparison to Goiânia. The government at the time, aiming to protect its own interests, tried to downplay the severity of the accident by withholding crucial information from the public. The authorities subjected the victims to screening at the Pedro Ludovico Olympic Stadium, falsely claiming it was just a gas leak to avoid widespread panic. Coincidentally, Goiânia was hosting the International Motorcycle Grand Prix at the Ayrton Senna International Raceway, and Governor Henrique Santillo feared that panic would spread among foreigners, damaging tourism revenues and the city's image. To better understand the severity of the Goiânia radiological accident, let's compare it to two major nuclear disasters, Chernobyl and Fukushima. In Goiânia, the source of radiation was Cesium-137. The maximum dose received by individuals was about 6.0 GY, and the total radioactive release was approximately 50.9 TBq. This accident was classified as Level 5 on the International Nuclear Event Scale, INES. In Chernobyl, the radiation included several isotopes such as iodine-131, cesium-137, and strontium-90. The maximum dose received by individuals reached 16 GY, and the total radioactive release was between 5,200,000 to 5,700,000 TB, about 100,000 times greater than in Goiânia. This disaster was classified as Level 7 on the INES scale. In Fukushima, the radiation included isotopes like iodine-131, cesium-134, and cesium-137. Exposed workers received doses of up to 0.25 GY, and the total radioactive release was approximately 900,000 TB. Fukushima was also classified as Level 7 on the INES scale. To get a clearer picture, the release of 50.9 TBq in Goiânia is small compared to the major nuclear accidents, but due to the direct proximity to the population and lack of knowledge, the effects were devastating on a local scale. Chernobyl had a global impact, with extensive areas in Europe still contaminated, and the radiation released was about 100,000 times greater than in Goiânia. Although less severe than Chernobyl, Fukushima's radiation release was much greater than Goiânia, affecting large areas and causing significant population displacement. These comparisons help to understand the severity and context of each accident. Even though the radiation release in Goiânia was smaller, the incident was extremely serious due to direct exposure and improper handling of the radioactive source. Devastating consequences. The impact of the radiological accident. After the accident, many residents attempted to sell their properties and leave the affected area. However, widespread panic about the presence of radiation in the air caused property values to plummet. Besides the devaluation of properties, the local population faced severe discrimination for a long time. The unfounded fear that radiation was contagious led to stigmatization, making it difficult for residents to access basic services, education, and even travel. The region also suffered a significant economic impact, with a drastic reduction in the number of businesses. Many establishments closed their doors, unable to survive the loss of customers who avoided the area out of fear of contamination. This stigma lasted for years, further exacerbating the suffering of those directly affected by the radiological disaster. Extensive examination and persistent issues. In the aftermath of the accident, the National Nuclear Energy Commission conducted a thorough examination of the population in the affected region. In total, about 1,000 people were exposed to the effects of Cesium-137. Many of them managed to reverse the external body contamination in time. However, 129 people showed significant internal and external contamination, developing symptoms and receiving only medication. Of these, 49 were hospitalized, with 21 requiring intensive treatment. Unfortunately, 4 of these individuals did not survive. The area where the Pedro Ludovico Olympic Stadium was located was one of the targets of the decontamination measures. Many houses were emptied, and industrial vacuum cleaners were used to remove dust before surfaces were examined for radioactivity. For more efficient identification, a mixture containing Prussian blue was used. In some homes, roofs were vacuumed, but in 2 houses, it was necessary to remove the roofs completely. Personal items such as toys, photographs, and household utensils were considered waste material and discarded. All materials collected during the cleanup were transferred to Telma Ortegal State Park. Persistent impacts and misinformation. To this day, many of those contaminated continue to develop illnesses related to radiation exposure, although this is rarely reported by the Brazilian media. 37 years after the disaster, many affected individuals complain about the lack of medication that, according to established laws, should be provided by the government. Many still live near the accident area on 57th Street, Paranaíba Avenue, 74th Street, 80th Street, 70th Street, and Goiás Avenue, but they no longer pose a contamination risk to the population. In one specific case, a resident who received the cesium threw the radioactive material into the toilet and flushed it. The house became known as the cesspit house. However, the state sanitation company claimed that the house did not have a cesspit but a cistern to prevent the population from thinking that the city's water was contaminated. The cleanup produced 13,500 kilograms of atomic waste, which needed to be stored in 14 fully sealed containers. These contained 1,200 boxes and 2,900 drums, which will remain dangerous to the environment for 180 years. To store this atomic waste and meet government agency recommendations, Telma Ortegal State Park was created in Goiânia, now belonging to the municipality of Abadia de Goiás, where there is an artificial mountain at ground level, coated with a wall approximately 1 meter thick, made of concrete and lead. Post-tragedy rebirth. By the late 1990s, the region began to overcome the frightening image left by the radiological accident thanks to revitalization efforts promoted by the municipality and state government. These efforts resulted in the revaluation of properties in the vicinity of the disaster site. In a few years, property values in the central region increased significantly, reaching 2 to 3 times higher than at the time of the accident. In 2006, the City Hall revitalized the old Mercado Popular, which was reopened in November during the 2007 edition of Casa Cor Goiás. In February 2007, the Mercado Popular transformed into a tourist attraction, drawing visitors with a gastronomic fare on Friday nights, always accompanied by live music. Gradually, the region marked by the tragedy was valued, sparking the interest of major construction companies that began building luxury buildings where there were once abandoned shacks. This urban and economic transformation brought new life to the area, changing public perception and creating a more promising future for local residents. Fatal victims. The human tragedies of the Goiânia radiological accident. Leida das Neves Ferreira, 6 years old, 6.0 G 600 Rem, was the youngest victim and received the highest dose of radiation during the accident. Daughter of Ivo Ferreira, she was initially confined to an isolated hospital room as the staff were afraid to approach her. Gradually, Lida developed swelling in the upper body, hair loss, kidney and lung damage, as well as internal bleeding. On October 23, 1987, she died from septicemia and generalized infection at the Marcílio Dias Naval Hospital in Rio de Janeiro. Her burial in a common cemetery in Goiânia was tumultuous. A special fiberglass coffin lined with lead was used to contain the radiation, but still, more than 2,000 people attempted to prevent her burial, fearing that her body would poison the area. After days of impasse, Lida was finally buried in a sealed lead coffin, lifted by a crane due to the high levels of radiation. Maria Gabriela Ferreira, 37 years old, 5.7 Guy, 570 Rem, wife of junkyard owner Dever Ferreira, fell ill about 3 days after coming into contact with the radioactive substance. Her condition deteriorated rapidly, developing internal bleeding, especially in the limbs, eyes and digestive tract, as well as hair loss. Maria Gabriela died on October 23, 1987, 1 month after exposure. Israel Baptista dos Santos, 22 years old, 4.5 Dry, 450 Rem, an employee of Dever Ferreira, worked on the radioactive source mainly to extract the lead. He developed severe respiratory disease and lymphatic complications, was hospitalized, and died 6 days later on October 27, 1987. Admilson Alves de Souza, 18 years old, 5.3 Guy, 530 Rem, another employee of Dever Ferreira, worked directly on the radioactive source. He suffered from lung injury, internal bleeding, and heart damage, dying on October 28, 1987. Other subsequent victims, a legacy of pain. Dever Alves Ferreira, the junkyard owner, initially survived the exposure despite receiving a dose of 7 Guai of radiation. He experienced hair loss and organ problems. Feeling guilty for opening the capsule, Dever became an alcoholic and developed cancer due to the radiation, dying 7 years later in 1994. Ivo Ferreira, Leda Dasnev's father, suffered low contamination but fell into depression after his daughter's death, starting to smoke 6 packs of cigarettes a day. He died of pulmonary emphysema in 2003, 16 years after the accident. The Cesium-137 Victims Association reports that by 2012, 25 years after the accident, about 104 people had died due to contamination, resulting from cancer and other problems, and approximately 1,600 were directly affected. Among the 46 most contaminated people, some survived despite the high doses of radiation, possibly due to fractionated doses, allowing the body's repair mechanisms to reverse the cellular damage caused by radiation. According to more recent information, by 2020, there have not been any additional detailed numerical updates regarding the total deaths directly linked to the incident after 2012. The lack of continuous long-term follow-up studies means that the precise number of later deaths and illnesses caused by the accident remains uncertain. Thank you for joining us as we explored the tragic events and lasting impacts of the Goiania radiological accident. Your interest in these historical events helps ensure that such disasters are remembered and lessons are learned to prevent future occurrences. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content on significant historical events and their repercussions. Stay tuned and stay informed.